On September 16, 1920, a powerful explosion shook Wall Street in Manhattan, right outside the J.P. Morgan and Company headquarters. At exactly 12:01 p.m., a horse-drawn wagon filled with 100 pounds of dynamite and hundreds of heavy metal fragments detonated in the heart of the financial district. The blast killed 38 people instantly and injured over 400 others. Debris flew across the street, and the shockwave shattered windows for several blocks. This explosion was the deadliest terror attack on American soil at the time. The attack took place during the peak of the lunch hour, ensuring maximum casualties. Although no one claimed immediate responsibility, investigators found leaflets nearby, signed by a group calling itself the American Anarchist Fighters. Suspicion quickly turned toward Italian anarchists, specifically followers of Giuseppe Galliani, known for advocating violent revolution. These Gallianists had already been linked to other bombings across the United States during the Red Scare. Despite a massive federal investigation, no arrests were made. Crucial evidence was lost when the city cleaned up the site before investigators could properly examine it. Over time, theories about the attackers' identities persisted, but the case officially remains unsolved. The Wall Street bombing stands as one of the earliest and most mysterious acts of mass political violence in the United States. On July 22, 1946, the King David Hotel in Jerusalem was the site of the most significant and controversial attacks during the British Mandate in Palestine. At approximately 12:37 p.m., a series of bombs detonated inside the southern wing of the hotel, which housed British military and administrative offices. The explosion caused the collapse of the entire wing, killing 91 people and injuring 46 others. Victims included British officials, Arab employees, Jewish civilians, and foreign nationals. The bombing was carried out by the Irgun, a Jewish underground militant group. Members of Irgun, disguised as Arab workers and hotel staff, smuggled approximately 350 kilograms of explosives into the hotel using milk churns. A smaller diversionary explosion occurred outside shortly before the main blast. According to Irgun, several warning calls were made to British authorities to evacuate the building. However, British officials either dismissed the threats or failed to act in time. Irgun stated that the attack was a response to Operation Agatha, a recent British military raid that targeted Jewish agencies and confiscated sensitive documents. They claimed the hotel was a legitimate military target due to its use by British command. Nonetheless, the high civilian casualty count sparked international outrage. The British launched Operation Shark in response, a massive security crackdown involving house searches, curfews, and mass arrests across Jerusalem. The bombing intensified the already volatile conflict between Zionist groups and the British administration. It also contributed to growing pressure on Britain to reconsider its position in Palestine. Within a year, Britain announced it would withdraw and referred the matter to the United Nations. The King David Hotel bombing remains a deeply divisive episode in history. On August 2, 1980, a powerful bomb exploded at Bologna Centrale, one of Italy's busiest train stations. The device had been hidden inside an unattended suitcase left in the second-class waiting room. At 10:25 a.m., as passengers moved through the terminal on a busy summer weekend, the explosion tore through the building. The force of the blast collapsed the ceiling, shattered walls, and blew out windows. It killed 85 people and injured more than 200 others, making it the deadliest terror attack in Italy's post-war history. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Train cars were overturned, emergency responders were overwhelmed, and citizens rushed to help victims. Taxis were used to transport the wounded when ambulances were not enough. Volunteers pulled people from the rubble with bare hands. The city of Bologna came together in solidarity and mourning, holding massive public funerals and marches demanding justice. Investigators determined the attack was carried out by the Nuclei Armati, a neo-fascist militant group active during Italy's turbulent years of lead. These years were defined by political violence from both far-left and far-right extremist groups. Francesca Mambro and Valerio Fioravanti, leading members of the group, were eventually convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. Others linked to the attack were also prosecuted. However, the case raised broader questions about possible state involvement. Some investigators and journalists argued that members of Italy's intelligence services may have obstructed the investigation or protected suspects. There was also controversy over links to Propaganda Due, a secret Masonic lodge believed to have deep influence within the Italian government, military, and police. The massacre came to symbolize a dangerous period in Italy when democratic institutions were being tested by hidden forces operating within the state. To this day, the station clock remains stopped at 10:25, a lasting memorial to the victims. On August 7, 1998, two powerful bombs exploded almost simultaneously outside the United States embassies in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. The attacks occurred in the late morning hours, targeting the buildings during peak working hours. In Nairobi, the explosion killed 213 people and injured more than 4,000 others. In Dar es Salaam, 11 people were killed and over 85 injured. These attacks were coordinated by Al-Qaeda. The bombings marked Al-Qaeda's first large-scale operation against American interest overseas. The organization had taken issue with the United States military presence in the Middle East and its support for governments that Al-Qaeda opposed. The skill and planning behind the attacks revealed that Al-Qaeda was far more organized and dangerous than previously understood. Investigations by the FBI and Kenyan authorities revealed that a truck filled with explosives was driven up to each embassy. In Nairobi, the blast destroyed nearby buildings and caused a massive crater. In response, the United States launched missile strikes against Al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan and a pharmaceutical plant in Sudan that was believed to be linked to chemical weapons production. This operation, known as Operation Infinite Reach, was one of the earliest direct military responses to international acts of terror by the United States. Several Al-Qaeda operatives were eventually arrested, tried, and sentenced to life in prison. These embassy bombings served as a clear warning of the rising threat of global terror and led to major changes in embassy security protocols. In September 1999, a wave of deadly explosions tore through apartment buildings in several Russian cities, killing nearly 300 people and injuring more than 1,000. These attacks struck Bainsk, Moscow, and Volgodonsk, leaving behind devastation and fear that deeply affected the Russian public. The bombings began on September 4th, continued over a 12-day period, with each incident targeting residential areas in the early morning hours when most people were asleep. The first attack occurred in Bainsk, where a truck bomb exploded near a military apartment complex, killing 64 people. Days later, two separate Moscow bombings killed a total of 240 people. The final blast occurred in Volgodonsk on September 16th, taking 17 more lives. Investigators blamed Chechen militants, linking the attacks to ongoing unrest in the North Caucasus region and using them as justification to launch the Second Chechen War. Serious doubts about the official version of events emerged. On September 22nd, a suspicious device was discovered in the basement of a building in the city of Ryazan. Residents alerted the police, and what appeared to be a live bomb was safely dismantled. The surprise came when the Federal Security Service claimed the incident had been a training exercise. Critics found this explanation unconvincing and accused the government of staging a false flag operation to justify military action and consolidate power. Several prominent figures who tried to investigate the bombings or challenge the narrative died under mysterious circumstances or were silenced. Although 8 men were eventually convicted, the mastermind, Akimez Gochiayev, remains at large. Today, the Russian apartment bombings remain one of the most controversial events in modern Russian history. On July 7, 2005, London experienced one of the most devastating terror attacks in its modern history. During the morning hour rush, 4 coordinated bombings struck the city's public transportation system, killing 52 civilians and injuring over 770 others. 3 bombs detonated almost simultaneously on the London Underground at 8:49 a.m., targeting trains near King's Cross, Edgware Road, and Aldgate. A 4th bomb exploded nearly an hour later on a double-decker bus at Tavistock Square. The attackers were 4 young British men, Mohammed Siddiq Khan, Shahzad Tanweer, Jermaine Lindsay, and Hasib Hussain. All were radicalized within the UK and had traveled to Pakistan prior to the attack for training and planning. They carried homemade explosives in backpacks, designed from easily available materials such as hydrogen peroxide. The attacks brought the entire London transport system to a halt. Emergency responders rushed to multiple scenes in what became one of the city's largest peacetime emergency operations. The chaos of multiple blast sites created initial confusion, with early speculation ranging from electrical faults to gas leaks before the truth was confirmed. Investigators quickly identified the bombers through CCTV footage and forensic evidence. By tracking their journey from Leeds to Luton and finally to London, authorities were able to piece together their movements and uncover connections to radical networks abroad. The 7/7 bombing shocked the British public and the wider world, not only because of the scale of the tragedy, but because the attackers were homegrown citizens rather than foreign operatives. This realization prompted widespread debate about integration, surveillance, and extremism within local communities. In response, the UK government introduced stronger counter-terror legislation, expanded intelligence capabilities, and increased effort to prevent radicalization. In June 2014, one of the most horrific atrocities in Iraq's modern history occurred at Camp Speicher, a former US airbase near Tikrit. ISIS, at the height of its territorial expansion, captured over 1,000 unarmed military cadets. Most of the victims were young Shia Muslims, undergoing training at the academy. After taking control of the base, ISIS militants forced the cadets into trucks under the pretense of relocation. They were transported to several remote sites, including Saddam Hussein's old presidential palace complex. The militants conducted sectarian screenings. Sunni cadets were often spared, while Shia cadets were executed en masse. The killings were systematic and carefully documented by ISIS, who filmed the executions as propaganda. Victims were either shot individually or pushed into trenches and executed in groups. Some were forced to lie face down at the edge of the Tigris River before being shot and thrown into the river. These videos shocked the world and were used to spread fear and assert the group's control over newly conquered territories. The total number of victims is estimated between 1,095 and 1,700, making it one of the deadliest single acts of terror in recent decades. After Iraqi forces retook Tikrit in 2015, mass graves were discovered around the palace complex. More than 1,000 bodies have been recovered and identified through DNA testing, but hundreds remain unaccounted for. The massacre led to widespread outrage across Iraq, specifically in the Shia community. Protests erupted demanding justice, and Iraqi courts eventually sentenced several suspects to death. However, many families of the victims believe that justice remains incomplete. The Camp Speicher massacre is remembered each year through public memorials, and it continues to serve as a reminder of the consequences of extremist ideologies when left unchecked. In January 2015, the town of Baga in northeastern Nigeria became the site of one of the deadliest massacres attributed to Boko Haram. The attack began on January 3rd and lasted for several days, culminating in the near-total destruction of Baga and surrounding settlements. Boko Haram fighters overran the headquarters of the Multinational Joint Task Force, a regional military outpost intended to coordinate defense among neighboring countries. After capturing the base, militants moved through the town, shooting civilians and setting buildings ablaze. Estimates of the death toll vary significantly. While Nigerian officials reported around 150 deaths, other sources, including Amnesty International and eyewitnesses, suggest that up to 2,000 people may have been killed. The lack of immediate media access to the area made it difficult to confirm exact numbers, but satellite images revealed widespread devastation. Entire neighborhoods were flattened, and over 3,700 buildings across Baga and the nearby village of Doran Baga were confirmed to have been damaged or destroyed by fire. Eyewitnesses described horrifying scenes. Armed militants went door to door, shooting indiscriminately and burning homes. Many residents fled into the bush or attempted to cross Lake Chad to escape the violence. Some drowned while fleeing. Others were captured. Young women were reportedly abducted. The attack created a humanitarian crisis, displacing thousands and prompting many survivors to seek refuge in neighboring Chad and other parts of Nigeria. The Nigerian military was criticized for failing to protect civilians and losing control of the area so rapidly. A few military officials were later disciplined for abandoning the base, but no one was held directly accountable for the massacre itself. The event raised urgent questions about the strength of Nigeria's security apparatus and the need for coordinated regional efforts to counter insurgent groups. Despite global outrage, justice for the victims remains elusive. The Ankara bombing of 2015 stands as the deadliest terror attack in modern Turkish history. On the morning of October 10th, a peace rally was held near the central railway station in Ankara. The event had been organized by labor unions, civil groups, and the pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party to promote messages of peace and democracy, specifically in opposition to escalating violence between Turkish forces and Kurdish militants. At approximately 10:04 a.m., two bombers detonated explosive devices within seconds of each other. The blast occurred in the midst of the rally crowd, killing 109 people and injuring over 500. Victims included activists, students, and elderly civilians who had come to demonstrate peacefully. The area was immediately plunged into chaos. First responders and volunteers worked rapidly to treat the wounded and transport victims to hospitals across the city. Investigators later linked the bombings to the Islamic State group. Although no group formally claimed responsibility, the evidence pointed strongly to ISIS involvement. The bombers had reportedly traveled from Syria and were part of a larger militant cell operating within Turkey. Many accused the government of failing to act on intelligence reports warning of a potential attack. Critics argued that security forces did not provide sufficient protection for the rally, despite its political sensitivity. The state declared 3 days of national mourning and promised a full investigation, though questions remained about lapses in security planning. A memorial now stands near the site, where civilians gather annually on the anniversary to honor the victims. The tragedy also led to increased domestic security efforts and renewed concerns about acts of terror in public spaces. The Orlando nightclub shooting occurred in the early hours of June 12, 2016, at Pulse, a well-known gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida. During a Latin-themed night, Omar Mateen, a 29-year-old security guard, entered the venue armed with a semi-automatic rifle and a handgun. He began shooting inside the crowded club at 2 a.m., resulting in the deaths of 49 people and injuries to 53 others. The attack lasted for approximately 3 hours before law enforcement officers engaged and killed Mateen during a final standoff. Shortly after the attack began, Mateen called 911 to declare his allegiance to the Islamic State. Although he claimed to be acting on behalf of the group, investigators later found no direct links between him and any international terror organization. Still, authorities officially labeled the incident both a terror attack and a hate crime due to the deliberate targeting of LGBTQ+ individuals. The shooting prompted an immediate response from police, emergency medical teams, and federal agencies. Despite arriving quickly, officers faced a complex hostage situation and delayed full intervention. After breaching a wall to rescue survivors, law enforcement ended the siege and recovered dozens of victims inside the building. In the aftermath, vigils were held worldwide to honor the victims. The tragedy sparked national conversations about gun control laws, counter-terror strategy, and the protection of marginalized communities. It also raised questions about how someone previously investigated by the FBI was still able to legally acquire high-powered firearms. In 2023, the city of Orlando purchased the Pulse site, with plans to establish a permanent memorial. On October 14, 2017, Somalia's capital, Mogadishu, experienced one of the deadliest terror attacks in African history. A truck packed with explosives detonated at the busy K5 intersection, an area surrounded by government buildings, hotels, and restaurants. The explosion was catastrophic, killing at least 587 people and injuring over 300. The force of the blast was so powerful that it created a large crater in the road and destroyed nearby buildings. Many victims were burned beyond recognition, and dozens more were buried before they could be identified. A second explosion occurred shortly after the first. Though its impact was smaller, no group officially claimed responsibility, but Somali officials blamed Al-Shabaab, a militant Islamist group that has waged a long insurgency against Somalia's central government. Though Al-Shabaab had conducted previous attacks, the scale of this bombing far exceeded anything seen before in Somalia. It targeted civilians, not military or political officials, intensifying public outrage. The Somali government declared 3 days of national mourning. Hospitals in the city were overwhelmed, and the international community quickly responded with emergency medical aid and supplies. Countries such as Turkey and Qatar sent planes loaded with relief materials, while Kenyan and Ethiopian hospitals received some of the critically injured victims for treatment. The attack exposed serious weaknesses in Somalia's security apparatus. Despite warnings, authorities failed to prevent the truck from reaching such a central location. This led to a nationwide reassessment of security procedures and intelligence sharing mechanisms. Vigils were held across Mogadishu, and ordinary citizens participated in cleanup and recovery efforts. The bombing united many Somalis across clan and political lines in their condemnation of violence and supporting for national healing. On Easter Sunday, April 21, 2019, Sri Lanka faced a shocking coordinated attack on places of worship and tourism. Bombers struck 3 churches during Easter Mass: St. Sebastian's in Negombo, Zion Church in Batticaloa, and St. Anthony's Shrine in Colombo. Nearly simultaneously, attacks occurred at 3 upscale hotels in Colombo, Shangri-La, Cinnamon Grand, and Kingsbury. A bomb also detonated at a private hotel, and a 4th hotel was targeted but did not explode. The devastation led to at least 269 deaths and more than 500 injuries, including victims from over 20 countries. Authorities confirmed that a locally based Islamist group carried out the attacks. However, an ISIS-linked media outlet, Amaq News, later claimed responsibility, suggesting a connection to global extremist networks. Investigators found that the bombers received some form of tactical guidance from abroad, possibly inspired by other attacks on Christians. Prior to the bombings, intelligence agencies received credible warnings. 10 days before the attack, police reportedly sent alerts about potential bombings targeting churches, but senior officials were not informed promptly. In 2023, Sri Lanka's Supreme Court found key leaders, including the president, the defense minister, the police chief, the intelligence head, and the defense secretary, legally accountable for failing to act on these warnings. The court ordered them to provide financial compensation to the victims' families. In the longer term, the Easter bombings prompted Sri Lanka to overhaul its security apparatus. Authorities implemented new regulations to detect extremist threats, improved intelligence sharing systems, and tightened controls over religious institutions. On May 8, 2021, a devastating attack targeted Syed al-Shuhada High School in western Kabul, Afghanistan. This area is home to a large population of Hazara Shia Muslims. The school was in session during the afternoon shift, which was reserved for female students, most of them between 11 and 15 years old. The attack began when a car bomb exploded just as students were leaving for home. 2 more bombs followed in quick succession, timed to inflict the highest possible number of casualties. The blast killed at least 90 people and wounded over 240. Most of the victims were young girls, many of whom were seriously injured and required emergency treatment in overwhelmed local hospitals. Although no group officially claimed responsibility for the bombing, Afghan officials and many international observers pointed to ISIS-K, an extremist group that has carried out similar attacks in the past. The Taliban, who were engaged in peace talks at the time, denied any involvement. Still, the attack exposed how vulnerable minority communities were, even in the capital city. Families rushed to the scene in search of loved ones. The images that followed showed broken school bags, scattered books, and grieving parents, sparking outrage both in Afghanistan and abroad. The United Nations and human rights organizations condemned the bombing, calling it an attack on education and on the rights of girls. The bombing triggered protests in Kabul, with citizens demanding better security and protection for children and minority communities. The tragedy also reignited conversations around the safety of educational institutions, especially for girls in conflict zones. It remains one of the deadliest school-related attacks in Afghanistan's history. On the evening of March 22, 2024, Crocus City Hall, a large concert venue near Moscow, became the site of one of the deadliest terror attacks in modern Russian history. Located in Krasnogorsk, just outside the capital, the hall was packed with more than 6,000 people gathered for a performance by the rock band Picnic. At around 8 p.m. local time, a group of 4 armed assailants stormed the building. The attackers opened fire with automatic weapons, targeting concertgoers at close range. They also used knives and incendiary devices, setting parts of the building ablaze. The fire spread rapidly through the structure, trapping many victims and complicating rescue efforts. Emergency services were slow to respond, in part due to the scale of the event and the heavy traffic surrounding the venue. The assault lasted less than 15 minutes, but resulted in catastrophic loss of life. At least 145 people were killed, and more than 550 were injured. Many victims died not from gunshots, but from smoke inhalation and the collapse of interior sections of the building. The attackers fled the scene, but were captured by Russian authorities within hours. ISIS-K claimed responsibility. The group released video footage that appeared to show the attackers inside the venue during the massacre. The Russian government initially suggested Ukrainian involvement, but most international observers dismissed those claims as politically motivated. American intelligence officials later confirmed they had warned Russia about a possible attack in early March. The suspects were identified as Tajik nationals. Their arrests led to questions about radicalization networks operating in Central Asia and Russia. Human rights groups urged authorities to avoid torture or abuse during interrogations. The attack reignited global concerns about the reach and resurgence of ISIS-linked groups outside the Middle East. On October 7, 2023, militants from Hamas launched an unprecedented surprise attack on Israel. The assault began around 6:30 a.m., with thousands of rockets fired into Israeli cities. At the same time, Hamas fighters breached the border fence in multiple places, entering Israeli territory using vehicles, motorcycles, and paragliders. What followed was one of the deadliest days in Israel's history. Armed militants attacked civilian communities, military bases, and public gatherings. At the Nova Music Festival near Riyadh, Over 340 people were killed in a single mass shooting. Around 1,195 Israelis died, including entire families and security personnel. Nearly 250 people were abducted and taken into Gaza, including children and the elderly. Critics pointed to significant intelligence failures, noting that Israeli authorities had underestimated Hamas's capacity and ignored multiple warning signs. In response, Israel declared war and began a massive military campaign in Gaza. The operation included airstrikes and a ground offensive, leading to widespread destruction and a death toll exceeding 57,000 Palestinians, according to international monitoring groups. A humanitarian crisis quickly unfolded. The October 7th attacks is now seen as a major turning point, prompting a complete re-evaluation of defense strategies, intelligence priorities, and border control measures. It also reignited global debate on the Israel-Palestine conflict. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you learned something, make sure to leave a like, comment down below your thoughts on anything I discussed in this video, and subscribe if you would like to see a part 3 or more videos like this one. Thank you again, and goodbye.